Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. This week on the podcast, I welcome Vivica Menegaz. Vivica does a lot of work trying to get people to understand sort of how to eat intuitively, how to use the land, how to do a lot of things that are sort of used to be wisdom and are now lost. And Vivica's been on the show before. She explained her story and her approach to nutrition and health in a previous podcast. So if you haven't checked that one out, please go listen to it. It's pretty incredible. She's an amazing, amazing woman. This time she actually chats about something very different and how she's sort of making a shift from nutrition to trauma and mental health as it relates to your overall health and well-being and how she does that. So it's a little spoiler alert. She does that through a lot of different plant medicines. So she talks about her experience, which was really, really rough before, suicidal, into a lot of drugs, and how she shifted a lot of that, obviously through diet, nutrition, all this stuff that she's always preached. But she's actually going through the process of leading ayahuasca ceremonies now. And so if you don't know anything about that and how it relates to health, again, Vivica is all about sort of using natural ways to get back to optimal health. And she makes a lot of really good points here using her experience and talking about what she's seen with other people around how these certain plant medicines can be vital to getting people on track. So no matter if people are eating really well or not, these things can be pretty magical. And so we're not advocating for the use of just flippantly going out to use drugs. There's a lot in this episode. Vivica shares a lot, and perhaps you can have an open mind when going into this one. We get into some deep corners, but it's great, and I hope you guys enjoy. This episode of The Natural State is sponsored by Ned. Ned is an incredible company that makes a lot of CBD products, and you guys can probably go back to some of my episodes and realize that I have been a CBD skeptic for a very long time. I think that it's really hard in this industry that's exploding to have really high quality products that actually do anything. I tried a bunch of different CBD brands before this one, and unless they had THC in them as well, not enough to get high, but just enough to amplify the effects of CBD, I didn't feel anything until I tried Ned and then was completely blown away. I'd been using their products before they sponsored the show for about 4 to 6 months and have noticed a huge increase the nights that I use their product, about 25 milligrams, so 50 milligrams per night of the CBD. And I sleep way better. But then also the most interesting part is my HRV, as tracked by my Oura Ring, the next morning is about 20 points higher the day that I use CBD versus not. I also have not been doing a lot of social drinking as of this year. So anybody who's been following my stuff knows that I've sort of been taking the backseat to any sort of glass of wine here, drink there, to take the edge off. And the last few months, I'm sure everybody in the world feels a little stressed out. And I've been doing the same amount, like 25 to 50 milligrams, to sort of replace that glass of wine, to wind down and de-stress. And it's been pretty remarkable to pull down the edge and make sure that I can just calm down at night with all that's going on in the world. The founders are amazing people. They really care about their supply chain, their sourcing. They do things the right way. And I asked them to hook you guys up with a little bit of a discount code. So if you want to try Ned out, just go to helloned.com/AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. That's HELLONED.com/AG15. That's AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. This show is also brought to you by Alitura Naturals. When I considered sponsors for this show, I reached out to Andy, who is the founder of Alitura, and pretty much begged him to support the show just because they are the only products that I trust to put on my skin. So much garbage is in skincare products that it blows my mind. I cannot find any other products. I do not put anything else on my body other than Alitura. It's actually a lie. I use White Oak Pasture's beef tallow soap in the shower, but other than that, everything sort of pre-post around that is Alitura. And if you don't know why, your skin is the largest organ in your body. It absorbs everything you put on it. And men are less known for using sort of skincare products, but women average over 250 chemicals that are in their bloodstream from their skincare products by the time they walk out the door in the morning. That is ridiculous. I personally use the moisturizer, the clay mask in my sauna, and the pearl cleanser. My fiance uses way more. She has a little bit more of a skincare routine than I. And the products themselves are made with the highest end ingredients that you would ever find in skincare products. This stuff's incredible. Andy himself is a testament how these products work. He's been on the podcast before to tell his story, but it was amazing. He was in a horrific accident. His face got all mangled up, and he basically made this formula to heal his scars, and he is now a male model. That is not a joke. He has incredible skin and is obsessed with the quality of his ingredients and the sourcing of them. He was just in Hawaii recently sourcing one ingredient of the many that are in one of his products. This guy goes, visits every single farm and product, and it is incredible. The quality you get here is by far the best in the industry. And so I begged him to sponsor the show and also begged him to give you guys a little bit of a hookup. So if you use code AG20, you'll get 20% off in free shipping over at alitura.com. That's AG20 at ALITURA to get 20% off your order at alitura.com. That's AG20 at ALITURA.com. You get 20% off in free shipping of your entire order. Again, I use the Pearl Cleanser and the Moisturizer. They are phenomenal. Vivica, thank you for joining me on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to be back here with you, Anthony.
Yeah, and this is the second episode we've done, and I think since the first one, a lot has transpired. It's been a couple of years ago, and here we are, end of March is when we're recording this, and I think there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. You're actually the first podcast that we've done on the show since this whole thing hit a couple of weeks ago, and so yeah, I think we could touch around some of this stuff. But you said you were just gone and have come back to this what sounds like paradise for you up by Mount Shasta. But just curious as far as like how coming back and reintegrating from you were a month in Peru.
Yeah, it actually was quite interesting because, of course, I was. Before I left to Peru, there was in the United States no news of the virus. And I also am a kind of person that I don't have a TV. I don't watch the news. Usually the only way I get news is through my mom. And sure enough, as soon as I got out of the jungle after a month in isolation, my mom, I talked to her and she was like, you need to be careful traveling, cover yourself, mask, gloves. And I'm like, what? So I came back to reality to things have already started to change in the world. And, when I got back, when was it? At the very end of January. No, it was in the middle of February, I got back and things were not that bad. But I remember sitting in the airport in Miami at 4 a.m. watching CNN and the cruise ship, incident. And I was like, this is really weird. And from there, of course, everything exploded. So it was an interesting return to reality or, to this reality. Because, I come back with all these plans and all these things that I wanted to do and really excited, supercharged from being in the jungle. And it's okay, nope. You're going to do your integration in isolation. So this is really not much different than what I do in Peru when I go to study in the jungle. I study plant medicines and we do fasting and isolation and, staying away from everybody. So it's very similar. I'm kind of been training for this for a couple of years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously is a lesson to be patient and to accept things and sort of go with the flow at this point. I mean, I think a lot of people in our society are sort of used to pushing their way through life and don't really surrender to the flow of life at times. And I think this is a really good lesson to people that sometimes you just need to do that. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And for me, it's really, I don't know, we talked about sustainable practices and a little bit about sustainable agriculture last time. And like, as we talked about detoxing in our last interview, but I think, and I hope that this is going to be the very needed wake up call on our practices. And luckily, a lot of us have been already on board and, making better choices with the environment and with the way that we walk on this earth and like, sustainability and like what we do with the medical system and relying on that. So I think that this could actually be a big blessing. It is a harsh blessing, but like we don't wake up until somebody slaps us in the face sometimes. And, humans are very good at like doing I call it the ostrich strategy. You stick your hand in the sand, but your butt is like hanging out. You think you're safe, you're protected, but you're actually really exposed.
Right.
So, it's time to get the head out of the sand.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that obviously you've talked a lot about this in the past too, but like people seem to be freaking out now about trying to have the latest little tip, trick, or hack to improve their immune system. So, I mean, I think that would be great for us to just debrief and chat about maybe just break down the immune system, how that works, and this whole spectrum of people shouldn't be focusing on this stuff when there's a problem. Yeah. It's not like you start thinking about things as they're burning down. Like you should be prepared for this ahead of time. And I think that's sort of like the people like you and I who've been preaching like, hey guys, it's really important to be healthy. You never know what's going to happen in life. And like, here's one of those big times where it's just sweeping through and creating so much pandemonium because people aren't taking care of themselves and aren't really, I guess, in a confident spot. I mean, we're seeing that the vast majority of the deaths are obviously older people, but people more so with pre-existing conditions and chronic diseases. And so, I mean, the thing you can do to be most resilient is to generally be healthy and take care of your immune system. So I know you do a lot of work with this in general. And so I'd just be curious as far as how you would like to explain, how the immune system works in a human, and then we can sort of work back up in ways people can address that in natural ways.
Well, I'm not a specialist in immunity. For me, it's just part of the work you do, the work I do. And, but I just wanted to share an insight before we get into that part that I had today. And it's just like something that was kind of brewing in the back of my brain, but exactly what you're talking about, like who is really at risk and why is this virus like, just spreading to the population and really, there's such high mortality and like how the people are, what is happening and why. For me, I realized that it is exactly that. It's like those of us, there is a separation of people, and it's those of us that have been taking care of our health. And for me, like the really key word here is self-reliance. So not relying on the government or the medical system or the doctor, to come from the outside and intervene pretty much when it's too late or, almost too late and then fix things. And instead, like, the self-reliance, the preparedness is not something about stocking a bunch of junk food, in our pantries and like, having a container dug into the hill with like canned beans. That's not the kind of preparedness that we need as humans. And I think that there are a lot of paradigm shifts that need to come with like, what does it mean to be prepared? And what does it mean to face this epidemic? And how can we truly be prepared? For me, it is about cultivating that immunity. It's about being resilient and like your self-reliance and resiliency that we can cultivate when we do all the right things for our bodies. And we don't just like do whatever is in front of us and, live by default. And then like at the last minute, we need to be rescued by a higher power. And in this case, the government. And I mean, here I can go on a really nice rant, but we'll keep this not political. So, for me, like immunity is like, of course, strongly related to our gut health and our microbiome. This is like, the really the center of the immunity. And the way I see it, like the most damage in this country has been done to gut health, especially through the use of glyphosates and GMO. And I'm sure you have talked about this with numerous people on numerous occasions.
Yeah, actually not a lot on the podcast, believe it or not. It's not been a thing that has come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been, like, there's something that has happened through my practice, because like I see these trends, and especially through the patients that I work with. And like in the last 3 or 4 years, really the trend has been more and more that people come with compromised immunity, but mostly is their guts are very compromised.
Right.
And, tying it back to diet, and like, we always talk about keto. We used to talk about keto a lot, keto paleo. And now the whole carnivore movement came about, and if you really think, why is carnivore so successful with so many people? For me, it's really evident, super evident, is like because their guts are so damaged that they can't tolerate anything but the purest of nutrition, that is meat, so no fiber, no plant phytotoxins, no agents that will cause even the least little bit of inflammation or irritation to the gut is tolerable anymore when our guts are so damaged. And why are our guts so damaged is, for me, a really big thing is the glyphosates and the GMO, especially glyphosates. They were patented as antibiotics. They were not even patented as a pesticide, or for agriculture. It was patented as an antibiotic, and that's the way it destroys the pests. But for me, it's kind of like, I can't understand. Like, if something kills an animal, even a microorganism or an insect, don't you think that it's going to be damaging for a human? Like, how can this very obvious connection not be made?
Right. It's frustrating.
It kills everything around you that is small. Like, you think in large quantities it's not going to kill you. And, and it's really interesting because there has been this war on bacteria in the United States, especially, all this like hand sanitizer and, antibiotics. Like, it's all about killing the bacteria, saving the human. But we are mostly bacteria. And what about our microbiome? That's what keeps us alive. That's our immunity. That's our ability to absorb nutrients, and we are here on this like campaign to kill all the bacteria, and without realizing that that's like a slow but sure suicide technique. So here we are with like this result is like all these people with extremely damaged immune systems and gut, microbiomes, and look at the epidemic of autoimmune diseases as well. So no wonder now we are going to be so susceptible to a virus, because our body does not have resilience. Our body, doesn't matter where this virus came from. Honestly, I think, I don't know what you think about it, Anthony. I've been pondering. It's like, is this really man-made? Is it a biochemical weapon? Did it escape from the lab? And was it like a big oops? Doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
The question
I
is...
agree with you 100% there.
Right. Yeah. And we need to look at it like it's a virus. They happen. They're smart. They're like, they have their own intelligence. It's like kind of the fight between the viral agent and our immune system. Like, one wants to come in, the other one needs to like, break it off. Or I'm just imagining, do you remember the very, very first video games? You're probably too young for that. But when I was a kid, the very first video game was like, the brick wall, where like you had like just a thing that one ball and black and white screen, and then you had a knob that you turn back and forth to like break down the wall. And for me, it's kind of like that's the action inside our body. Like, we need to be able to defend ourselves naturally with multiple mechanisms. And as I say, I am not a doctor. I am not a biochemist. So I will not go into all the fancy, immune processes. But as a holistic practitioner, my strength is not to look at the microscopic, but to look at what I call the holographic picture of a human being. And that's why I go to the jungle as well. And I study with plant medicines because like, I feel like they're an incredible tool to be able to understand humans as energy and from the different perspective than just like, you know, the 3D perspective of our bodies. But then there is our energetic bodies and then our emotional bodies, our mental bodies. So to be an holistic practitioner for me really means that I need to expand my view to be able to encompass all these different layers, all these different aspects, and put them all together in this like hologram that I put in my head. Usually when I work with people with cases, I create this picture in my head that kind of rotates, you know, like the fancy computer screens, or like it used to be in like Star Wars back in the days, like the first movie where they have this like 3D image, like, wow, what is that? So now we have to look at all the different dimensions and taking it back to immunity. I feel like, you know, starting from the physical, there is so much we can do and so much we can do to be resilient so that we can like brace ourselves and be, you know, not scared by whatever virus, whatever pandemic, because we're educated ourselves. And, you know, we are not just waiting for the superhero to come and rescue us. We know what to do. That's one of my big missions, by the way, is like educating my patients so that they know how to be more self-reliant.
Right. And so when you're looking at, like you said, this holographic view of humans and health, I mean, what are some of the things that come to mind as sort of the big components that put that together?
I'm sorry?
What are some of the components of, you know, this holographic view of health instead of just looking at it sort of one-dimensional or two-dimensional? Like, how do you think that these things interact? Like, what are the sort of big levers that you focus on?
So, you know, the first for me, I always start the approach from the physical level, and I look at the different systems inside the body and their interaction, which is something that for me is really important. And I feel sometimes that's like what gives me an edge on cases, like, you know, to handle complex cases, is because like you need to really focus on all the different interactions. So there are, you know, the different systems like the digestive system, the endocrine system, the lymphatic system, musculoskeletal system. So we need to bring those all together in connection and look at where, you know, the connection points are, because the body, in what I see in clinical practice, it creates all these kind of vicious loops, like, you know, kind of like a snake biting its tail, where they either reinforce health or they reinforce disease. So this is the first step, like on the physical level. And then I look at that through time. So this is another, you know, maybe the fourth dimension or the fifth dimension is also time. And looking at the case history, how it developed through time, because like we carry things inside our body that might have happened like 20, 30 years ago. And I'm talking toxins that, you know, can be stored even in your bones and in your brain, in your muscles, in your organs. So toxins, again, you know, my favorite topic. Yeah. And how they develop through time. And so how through time, the organism had to adapt to the toxicity and what it kind of a side effect or effects it caused. And then looking at trauma and how trauma has affected through time the ability of the organism to defend itself. Or, you know, usually we think about trauma, stress, adrenals, endocrine system. But I feel that, you know, this is kind of my new passion of study that came from plant medicines, because like, you know, as you work with any entheogens or any psychoactive medicines that let you open up a deeper, you know, door of your psyche, or, and, you know, a different level of access that you would be in ordinary consciousness, it opens up a different view of like what trauma means, and then the connection with the body that I find absolutely fascinating. If I had another lifetime, I would just go back to university and get a whole different degree But like these new modalities, actually, a lot of them are pretty new about PTSD, for example, and how PTSD and trauma, and the repercussions of trauma in the body are affecting the physical body. So for me, also being a nutritionist or, a practitioner that works mainly with the body, I am not trained or certified in any of the other modalities of like, trauma treatment of patients or a therapist. That's what I wish I could do. Maybe, who knows? But still from the physical level, I'm starting to make more and more connections the more that I start to study. And, for me, it's a very personal journey because like, as I started working with plant medicines, I realized that I do have not just PTSD, but complex PTSD. It's called CPTSD. So I started, opening up the cosmic can of worms, I call it, and going back into the trauma roots of my parents and then seeing how they develop from the physical level, kind of like tracing them back. So this is another aspect of that holographic picture. One of the connections that I started making recently, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, if you ever heard of it, but the correlation between trauma and autoimmunity.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think before we go further, I would love for you to sort of take a step back and explain to people, trauma. Some people may have different notions of what that means and what that is. So I'd love for you to sort of frame this in your own definition. So that way we can sort of get back to it and dive in way deeper.
Yeah. So I think that in my opinion, trauma can be defined, and there are a ton of definitions from different practitioners and, doctors and whatever. But for me, it is any event that creates a part of your psyche or, of your mind to separate almost and freeze and create a strategy to survive, because in that moment it feels attacked, and it feels attacked to the point that it is a question of survival. So this can be, when we think trauma, sometimes we think really traumatic events. They can be anything like abuse, violence, the death of a loved one, even a car accident or, a physical accident where like as a kid you might have broken a bone or something that really in that moment threatens your survival. Mm-hmm. It causes, especially as a child, as you don't have the rational mind of an adult to really be there to rationalize things. So you need to create this persona, like part of yourself needs to step in and, and protect you from that trauma. So this is more of on a mental level, on a psychological level. But I feel that it's, again, back to that holographic part, it has the physical repercussions. And that is also because when you create these like trauma pattern, we call them, you create a trauma pattern. And a lot of times trauma patterns are addictions. And a big one is addiction to food. So that one comes with very, severe repercussions to your health and physical well-being, because it's, it's going to drive certain behaviors and have, again, like, through time and through action, like it creates all those set of circumstances that bring you to the present as a whole person. It's really, humans are complex. Right?
Yeah. I mean,
we're so complex. Yeah. There are so many things.
I've been trying to dive in as well on like understanding how mental health and sort of these trauma that stay with you, how that impacts our physical health. And like you said, that you're finding all these connections between trauma and autoimmunity. So I'd love for you to sort of dive in with your experience there.
That's a kind of pretty new idea that has come to me just a couple of days ago, actually. And I was, I do a topic of a month. Usually every month I have a different health topic that I do on my social media, and I do some videos on it, and I try to educate, as much as possible, give like a lot of information. And my perspective. And the month of March was autoimmunity. So I think it was on Instagram. Somebody emailed me. A lady emailed me, and she was discussing her autoimmune condition. And then she mentioned her history of trauma. And that was just a couple of days ago. And it really got me thinking, because then I started thinking about all my patients, and then I started thinking about myself, because I had Hashimoto thyroiditis, which I healed myself of. But I was like, wow, I started having an autoimmune process, and, and I have PTSD. So how are these connected? And then I'm thinking about other ones of my cases, and I was like, it's pretty amazing that in every person that there is autoimmunity, there is childhood trauma. And then again, Anthony, honestly, the way we are in 2020 in the United States, you show me a person that didn't have trauma, like I would like to meet them and see them, because it's pretty rare at this point. We are just the product of a pretty dysfunctional society that has not been able, we came away from a more holistic way of living and into this whole crazy experiment that is like Western life and capitalism and, this crazy economy of like growth and technology, all the things that took us very far, very fast. So I think that trauma is like woven into our culture so deeply that just right now we're really becoming aware of it. The PTSD diagnosis is only about 30 years old. And now with all these, what are called trauma-informed therapies that are coming up because of it, thank goodness. And there is a whole different lens of viewing certain conditions from the mental health perspective that before were diagnosed as like brain disorders. Even things like bipolar or even schizophrenia that, people were just diagnosed, labeled, and then sent off with a bunch of medication. And now if we look at those same conditions through the trauma lens, we can see that actually there is something under the surface, and there is a lot more than can be done for healing than just like put people on medication. Sorry, I diverted. I really...
No, this is great. So how did you first start getting into this stuff yourself?
To heal myself, of course, of course, I think for most of us, like the things that fascinate us or interest us have a personal reference point. And just like I studied nutrition, it was for the love of food and for the love of helping other people. And my mission of service in the world, which has become more and more and more clear, especially through the work with plant medicine. But, there came a point in my nutrition practice and in my personal life, where so many questions, I've always had so many questions. And I, remember like so much suffering in my life and so much being like having to rely just on myself. I've had a pretty crazy life. And never understanding why am I different and how am I different than other people, and am I crazy? Working with therapists like, old school therapists, like not being able to really help and understand what was going on with me. And so this like feeling of like helplessness and like, and when you suffer, of course, you become more sensitive to other people's suffering. And so that always propelled me to like look inside myself first and finding the root causes. This is like one of my main obsessions. It's like, I am a detective and I need to find the culprit, the bad guy, I need to find the root cause. I am never, for anything, not just like, when I had hypothyroid and I had Hashimoto's, I didn't just settle for taking a supplement even, or leave alone a medication, but not even a supplement to just manage it. I had to fix it. And I did, but then, once I was like, okay, I got my health in a good grip. I can heal myself. I can help people heal themselves, because I don't heal nobody. Nobody does. You can heal yourself. Your body heals itself. So I was really passionate about helping other people learn how they can heal themselves. But then the personal stuff was still there, and I've always been, my personal life has always been really crazy, to describe it in one word. A lot of pain, a lot of conflict, broken relationships, a broken marriage, not being able to ever be like other people, like married with kids and, happy and stable. So I was just on a quest, a lifelong quest of why am I like this? And I think that finally at 51, I am finding some answers, and I'm really excited because it helps me see everything with a slightly different perspective. And when things really start making sense, you're like, finally, like now it makes sense. There is so much relief. Right. It's like giving, a diagnosis sometimes I think is helpful, not because like it's a lot of people see it as a life sentence. For me, it's just like an ability to understand what I'm dealing with. And it's kind of almost like a challenge to overcome. It's never a sentence. So understanding better what my issues were, just like, the physical one, now the deeper one, the emotional ones, it helps me understand, but it also helps me keep myself healthy. Because if one of my patterns of self-destruction or coping pattern or trauma patterns involve, being a drug addict or being an alcoholic or being a food addict, then I will never, ever be able to stay healthy. Right. And this is for, all the people that I deal with in my practice as well. And that's what really propelled me to this, Anthony, as well, is because like you can teach people how to manage behaviors, but behavior is like a symptom. And just like we don't chase symptoms, I'm sure, you're a chiropractor, you've been in practice before, and, I'm sure that this is your philosophy as well. You don't chase symptoms. Yeah. You go for the root cause. And so it's the same as like in behaviors. Like I can give them the perfect diet and the perfect amount of supplements and everything to make somebody healthy. The moment they finish my program, within a year, they're back to square one. Why? And why did some people heal so fast and get, really on board with themselves and just needed the information and boom, like everything was great. And some people never were able to. For me, it's what is the root cause of that behavior? And like, how can we actually address that? Because that is what fixes everything else. And so it's like the ultimate carrot,
Right. And so, I think that some people, when you say plant medicine, maybe have now some understanding what that means with, a lot of the passing of, psilocybin with the research and stuff we're figuring out there, MDMA, et cetera. How has your journey through here been? Like what compounds have you used and what are you focusing on now?
So I started self-medicating very early because of the emotional, psychological pain. And so as a kid in Europe, we were smoking hashish and and then I got into heavier drugs, like cocaine, because of the self-medicating properties. I never chose to do antidepressants, but that was the antidepressant. And, the typical alcohol and cocaine cycle, as I was in my 20s in Europe still before I came here, and then here in the States. And now looking back with some sense, I see that I was just trying to self-medicate and manage my condition, whatever. And funny enough, like even with those substances, you wouldn't think, but for me, it was like almost a gateway to knowing myself better or a gateway to empathy with others. And some sort of medicine. It had some strange medicinal properties for me, but I outgrew it pretty fast. And, especially going to college and having to be on a schedule and, having to take care of myself. Luckily, it kind of saved me from, circling into the party world and Hollywood. But then I discovered MDMA, and it was like a pretty incredible experience for me. My first MDMA experience, it was in a club and after hours actually, and very much like, ecstasy pill. And for me, it was like one of the most incredible spiritual experiences I ever had. And it became like I received guidance. I got my first spirit guide through MDMA, and it basically saved my life because I was in a very dark time. Even though I was going to college, a very prestigious school, doing great, I was like deep in my patterns and becoming suicidal. I've been suicidal like throughout my life in different times. I tried to kill myself 3 times. Not a lot of people know that, but it's like I couldn't find answer. I couldn't find help. And so it was, I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially in moments like this when we feel so desperate, then you don't know what to do with yourself. And it's a very appealing kind of exit door and like relief from the pain, like finally. But MDMA changed that for me. And it led me on kind of a spiritual journey that lasted about 3-4 years, where I regularly, the medicine called me back to use it and did a series of encounters with the spirit guide that basically put me on the straight and narrow, and also like really show me my, connected with my self-love and the beauty of life and community. And we had this like dance community that probably the people from California have heard of Moon Tribe, but it was really, for me, it was like our spiritual community and our church. And we would go and do the full moon parties and get together and use MDMA in a way that was, yes, it was partying, yes, it was having fun, it was escaping, but it was also bringing us together and healing those like emotional wounds and traumas. But of course, even that is just a palliative because, as you know from MAPS, that MDMA is used in therapy for like PTSD with great success. That was not with a therapist. It was just kind of self-prescribed. So yes, it had a benefit, but I also see that it was a very limited benefit to what it could have been if used in a proper context with a therapist that guides you. My guidance was from the other realms, and I'm grateful for that. And that's saying that, when we're supposed to be here and we have a purpose and a mission, which we all do, the guidance will come one way or another. Even if it has to come from the other realms, it will come. I wish it could have been a therapist or a mentor or a guide that physically, like in the 3D, or a parent. I never had that kind of guidance growing up, So I wish that could have been that, but other lacking for better, I got it straight from the spirit world, which is kind of cool. I'm not complaining at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the tough spot we're in is that we have so many, and we have a lot of research coming out. There's so many anecdotes like in people like yourself who are big proponents of this. Myself is included in that. But like, we say these stories around like how it can be so helpful, like you said, suicidal, depression, and this stuff can sort of change your life and open up a whole new dimension. Yet there's not any place where we can really go to access this stuff. So then people say, okay, they may be feeling like that. They don't have anybody. Then like trying to acquire illegal narcotics, as they're classified currently, to try to like expose themselves to it without any sort of guidance or help. I mean, we're in such a weird transition period right now.
Right.
I mean, how do you see us going from where we are today through? I mean, like MDMA is fast tracked, psilocybin's, very close behind. I think within a few years, this will be okay. But I mean, for people right now who are listening to this and maybe experience a lot of the same things, I mean, I don't even know. Like, obviously, I'm not going to recommend that people go buy illegal substances, but I mean, what are options right now? Like, I'm sure you have a lot of people that you work with that are of the same camp.
Yeah, you're right. It's a transition moment. I'm seeing a lot of really positive change though. Look at Oakland, in California has now legalized this kind of substances like mushrooms and MDMA, and even ayahuasca is now legal in Oakland. So I see, and I have a friend, dear friend, very close friend jungle friend, who's a facilitator in Oakland, and she's working with the government, with the city, actually, with different government agents or city agents, in order to plan out how we can make the legalization most effective to help and support people. It's really exciting time. Before the virus hit, I was visiting with her, and we were talking about how the work that she's involved in, and it's really gives me a lot of hope. There are things happening. The work of MAPS has been absolutely invaluable, and I think that even through MAPS, people are able to find a lot of therapies. There are many cities that actually have legalized. Colorado has legalized, decriminalized. And I think there are other cities in the United States, but there are therapists that are allowed to work with entheogens like MDMA or prescribe like psilocybin for micro and macro dosing. So I think that resources are becoming more and more available. That's what from the 60s until now, it's been kind of like the Wild West, because we had very little guidance, and a lot of us had to just do it ourselves. It was a question of survival. This is not what I recommend. I think that because of the resources now becoming so much more available, that maybe the first thing would be to look up through MAPS and contact MAPS and find a therapist or a practitioner or a facilitator that is legally, able to work with those substances. I personally work with ayahuasca, and I have been studying with the Shipibo tradition, which is one of the indigenous traditions that they're like the keepers of the medicine from thousands of years. And the makers of the medicine is one of the deep jungle traditions from Peru. And I've been apprenticing. Traditionally it's a long apprenticeship. It's at least 10 years, minimum before you can serve. But we live in different times, and, I've been taking kind of the accelerated course. And so I have started serving in very limited amounts, but not here, not in the United States yet because of the legality question. So, when I am in Peru, I'm able to practice medicine, and, I have a teacher there that I bring people to, and I work with him. We do retreats, and I would like to be more and more involved as the legality status shifts here in the United States. I'm excited to see that probably I will have the opportunity to legally practice and help people through that. But for me, this comes, in together with the studies on, on myself and the PTSD and the trauma component, because this is what I am really called to do, is working in this way holistically, and that plant medicine specifically is just another tool in the toolbox of a holistic practitioner. I don't see myself separate from being a nutritionist to being an ayahuasca facilitator. It's the same thing. It's just a different aspect of holistic health. And, a lot of people that ayahuasca has become incredibly popular in the United States. And I am connected into, a web of local facilitators here. I've seen a lot. And unfortunately, I got to say, Anthony, that I see a lot of very lightheartedness in the way that this sacred medicine is handled. A lot of people just want to have an experience. A lot of people come to it for healing. But from the facilitator side, I feel that there are a lot of well-meaning people who come to this medicine and want to help and want to facilitate without having the proper understanding and training to handle what this really means. Right. Because remember the cosmic can of worms? I mean, you have the responsibility, just it's kind of like being not just a doctor, but a brain surgeon. Imagine you're a brain surgeon. You wouldn't go through brain surgery even after you've gone through medical school. You need to specialize. You need to understand the tools that you're working with, the physiology of what you're operating on. And, you need to understand how to travel the invisible, but it's about energetically, like, keep your patients safe, because it's not about sanitation and your scalpel here. It's about energetically. And, you are kind of the grounding rod of that experience.
Right.
And
go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I think, and also you're responsible for like not dropping people after they had the experience, but like what we call integration. That's the most important part of the ceremony. That's the most important part of the medicine, because the medicine will show you things, but then what do you do with it? How do you handle that? And for some people, it can be very traumatic. I've seen people being re-traumatized through the medicine because the facilitator was not knowledgeable or trained enough to know how to handle those situations. And that sucks. Right. I don't like that at all. Like, people should not do that if they're not ready to handle, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. What if you get a very complex case, somebody with lots of trauma, and then, they totally re-traumatize themselves? That's not right.
Right. And so when you say opening up the cosmic can of worms, like what do you mean by that? And how would people expect, what that means as far as your perspective on it?
Well, because it will start opening up, like showing you those parts of yourself that might have broken off through trauma or might need attention, might need to be worked with. And the medicine can show you anything from things that you want to see and you're ready to handle, and things that you think you're not ready to handle. So it might show you things that are very intense. And the process is a very physical experience, by the way, and it's like the purge is not just energetic, like it will make you purge, you will vomit most likely through your ayahuasca experience. So it's physical. It can be very uncomfortable. It can be absolutely blissful, but you don't know. It's always different. And, you can be taken into places, like you can be taken through the death portal, and which, by the way, is like the most amazing gift of that medicine, I feel, Anthony, is that you'll get to practice dying. They call it the vine of death for a reason. And like, you really do get to practice dying almost at a physical level, even though you don't physically die, your body doesn't die. But on the medicine, you really do get to experience that sensation of like having to go through that death portal. And it's amazing. It's like the most profound and incredible teacher, puts everything in perspective. But it can be really, really scary. And it can be really, really dark. So if a facilitator is not equipped to take a patient through that experience, so it can be a positive rebirth experience and, really positive learning, then it can be really bad for the patient. And, I've seen people come off ceremonies and then having to go to the hospital and getting on medication and antidepressants and antipsychotic medication. That was not right. Mm-hmm. So working with these medicines with really experienced and reputable facilitators is really important. And that even in Peru, like I would not go to like 90% of the facilitators, shamans, whatever you want to call them in Peru, because I know that they might be well-meaning, but they, and some of them are not. They just want to make money. It's like, they're poor. So anything that helps them survive is the way to survive. So we need to be really careful because, again, like, this is the kind of experience where it's kind of like going to a really bad surgeon. Like, you don't want to do that. You need to do your research ahead. Don't just put yourself in the hands of whatever doctor. It might be a well-meaning doctor, but it might have a really bad, skills or case history. So we need to be careful who we trust, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the complicated thing. It's a very hard place to go without, knowing how to work through it. And like a lot of stuff can come up with people. And I'm sure, you said that it's a great thing to experience this feeling of dying. I don't think a lot of people would like that. Just signing up for it, but it is an altered state of consciousness. So it's like, it's, I would say probably not the same thing. I think a lot of people just have a fear of death they don't fully realize. How does your experience differ from, for example, the experience you had when you did MDMA versus ayahuasca? Like, are they just completely different things, or how do you see those tools as being used for different purposes?
So I think that, every single one of the medicines has its place and also resonates different for different people. Like, some people, I did mushrooms before back in the days, the party days. And for me, they were never really a medicine. And as I worked with ayahuasca, I know that I don't need to work with mushrooms because they're not my medicine. And for other people, it's the opposite. Mushrooms are their medicine, absolutely, like they're teachers, and ayahuasca is not, and it doesn't really do anything for them. So there is that is pretty individual what you need. But MDMA for me is like the connection, like straight connection to the divine. And it just like takes me back into being one with love and like one with source. And it also is like it's the voice of my higher self that talks to me with love and compassion instead of the voice of the inner critic that I hear every day. So my higher self guides me into like seeing gently and compassionately seeing all those different aspects that I need to work on, or, it's a lot of work. And sometimes it's hard, even with that compassionate love that you feel, it's hard to look at things. But for me, MDMA always holds you really tenderly. And so it's great for people that had a lot of trauma. It's very heart-opening and reconnecting yourself with self-love. Now, with ayahuasca, there is that as a possibility. But again, you never know what the medicine decides that you need in that moment. So you might think that I want to go and look at all the dark places in my psyche, and I'm ready to go through this whole dark journey. And then all you experience is like absolute bliss and one with source, So ayahuasca is like really complex. It's a complex medicine. It's a complex cosmology. It has its own world. And that's the thing, that you enter in this world that like where you're like in a foreign country, and you need to start to learn how to navigate. And that's not something that is very easy. That's why a good facilitator with ayahuasca is much more important. And they need to have a lot of experience. And, I feel also that, as amazing as indigenous people facilitators are, there is also a kind of a loss in translation, like a cultural discrepancy there. I see it a lot because, I'm Italian. I come from kind of a Latin culture. So I go to Peru, I speak Spanish perfectly, and also my culture is more similar to their culture. And then there is the indigenous component. But I see how the Westerners sometimes, they really can't fully, identify, understand. Does the medicine still work, and will they still feel benefits? Yes. But again, I've seen some pretty intense things happen. So another element that I think is very important is to be able to go experience things with people that can be bridging. We are really like one of the things that people like me would represent is that bridge, cultural bridge between the indigenous experience to the Western experience and mentality. I feel like that's really, really important to be able to translate, because our trauma experiences and, from this culture, they don't apply to them at all. Like they have their own and they're different. So we need to have both together in mind in order to make, especially with ayahuasca, maybe like with San Pedro and other indigenous medicines or peyote, like there is, again, this bridging of cultures that is really important. And yes, at the same time, the medicine will always communicate directly to you. You know, the facilitator just is there to keep you safe, kind of, and guide you and put things in context. So I think that there's a lot is possible with ayahuasca. Like, it's very helpful. But again, the most important part is the integration. It's kind of like you go like the hero's journey into this other world, this other territory, uncharted territory within yourself, in the cosmos. But then you come back, and you come back with these gifts that you need to start applying to your life. And that's where the therapies, like trauma-informed therapies, integration therapies, integration coaches, are really beneficial. I feel that that's going to come up more and more as, you know, practice modalities, because like people are going to need them as they start working more and more with the entheogens.
Right. I mean, if somebody's not ready for the whole experience, or any of them that you had mentioned, or don't have access, or whatever, how would you recommend people start to get a dose of this without, I mean, as like meditation a good start, this sort of, you know, thing that you're talking about with, as far as just this spiritual journey that I think a lot of people start at different times. Like, how would you recommend people do that if they didn't have access to any of these substances?
I think that there are amazing modalities out there, like a lot of different modalities that will take you to similar places. Like, I know that breath work is one that just pops right into my mind. I don't do breath work, but I have friends that transition from plant medicine into just pure breath work, especially like holographic breath work. Actually, I have a friend that I need to talk to today, Michael Brian Breaker. Is in Ohio, where I used to live, and he does that kind of breath work, and they're amazing, with amazing results. Of course, you know, yoga, meditation, Qigong is another thing that's been really in my field, working with energy, and, you know, working with Qi, with your own vital energy, still working with energy, even if you're, you know, conscious and aware and not on any medicine, but you're able to work with energy, move it through the body, and kind of achieve similar results. Is like all these like body mind techniques that are really beautiful. And of course, yoga, you know, it's old, true and tested favorite.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is amazing stuff. I mean, it's like you said, it's a huge part that's gone underserved in people's quest. And like, I think that a lot of times, and I've seen it myself with people unlocking some of these things and it taking care of a lot of physical health problems, which has been amazing. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably a lot for people to take in. Thanks for being brave enough to share your experiences. I mean, there's a lot of vulnerability there, so I really appreciate that.
Oh, you're very welcome. You know, I know it's hard, but like being vulnerable is what helps others the most, and like in the end it helps ourselves, because then as we are able to connect with others, this is what we want as humans. I feel like that is like the most important part of being a human being, is the ability to connect with other humans and nature and animals.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much.
That's why I have this podcast, is to connect with other people.
Right.
So I mean, we're on the same page there. And I know you're busy working on a lot of stuff. I mean, where can people find you and some of your projects? I'm undergoing some rebranding, but I'm still, you know, all my usual channels are there. So thenourishedcaveman.com is my blog, my website where you can find me, and thehealingfoodsmethod.com is my program. And then, of course, I'm on all the social media, or you can just Google Vivica Menegaz, and you will find everything. I'm like all over the internet, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of it. Got it. Well, thank you for the work, Vivica. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.